Have you ever had a conversation with someone in Spanish and eventually that conversation just comes to a halt? It's possible you didn't know some of these words that I'm going to teach you. The words I'm going to be going over today are going to teach you how to keep a conversation flowing through Spanish so you can practice more and improve your abilities. I'm talking about, yes, you guessed it, the question words. I actually didn't know how important Spanish question words were until I had to go to a hospital in Mexico. Now, hear me out for a moment. I was at a Christmas party. Well, actually, this was shortly after the Christmas party, and my friend was very pregnant, and her water broke, so we needed to go to the hospital so she could have her baby. Once we get to the hospital, it was very difficult for me to understand everybody talking to me. At this time, my Spanish was not very good. I tried to communicate with the people, and I kept using all of the wrong question words. And it made it very difficult for me to have a conversation with the people so that we could get what we needed for her to be more comfortable. She was in a lot of pain, so it was very difficult for her to talk to people. Fortunately, the baby was born. Here's the picture. And I was very happy because this experience helped me learn all of the Spanish question words so that I could speak better. These words are very handy if you're going to a Spanish speaking country because they will help facilitate a conversation. But before I jump into what are all of these Spanish question words, I want to go over the syntax of Spanish a little bit. Syntax is the order in which we use words, and in English, that order is very set. We can't really move words around too much in English, otherwise, it will be difficult for people to understand us. Could you imagine saying, my house is where? People are going to understand you, but it's going to sound very, very weird in English. The thing is, in English, we also have to use these question words. We can't say my house. We have to say, where is my house? We have to put that question word in there or it doesn't make sense. But Spanish is very flexible. First, you can move around some of these words and people will still understand you. And in other cases, you can completely remove the question word altogether. Now, I know you're thinking, what? How does this work? So let's go over it. For example, I could say, ¿Qué tipos de comida le gusta Valencia? In here, I'm asking what type of food does Valencia like to eat? But we can completely remove that question word que and we can replace it with this sentence. Come comida venezolana Valencia? Here, if you listen at the end, I've raised my intonation a little bit. I've completely taken out the question word, and it's still a question that makes sense to a native Spanish speaker. What I'm saying is, does Valencia like to eat Venezuelan food? Now that we've got the boring syntax out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into 8 words that are going to make you a better Spanish speaker almost immediately. And the first one is very simple. We're going to start with what. And this one is very confusing for a lot of people who are trying to learn Spanish because in English we only say what. There's not another word for it. But in Spanish there are actually 2 ways that you can say the word what. The first one is que, and the second one is cuál. So a lot of people wonder, when do I use que and when do I use cuál? And it's actually not that difficult. You're going to use cuál for something specific. If you're asking somebody what their name is in Spanish, you have to say, ¿Cuál es tu nombre? And this usually takes most native English speakers for a whirlwind in their mind. And it's because whenever we think of this, we say, what is your name? And in English, it's kind of implied that we're going to get one response. But in Spanish, you have to make it known that you're asking for one specific answer. So instead of saying ¿Qué es tu nombre?, you're going to say ¿Cuál es tu nombre? And you're going to use cuál for specificity. You want to make sure that when you say cuál, you're asking for something specific. You could even have 2 different fruits and say, hey, ¿cuál fruta quieres comer? This, you're asking for 2 things. You're asking somebody for something very specific, so you have to use cuál. So when would we use que? Well, you have to use que whenever you're asking for more information about something. Or perhaps you don't know what a word means and you want to ask for a definition. Here, you're also going to use que instead of cuál. So just keep that in mind whenever you're asking questions in Spanish and you want to say what, use cuál for specificity and que for extra information. That's going to make using these words correctly very simple for you. But we can't have a conversation or continue a conversation with just one question word, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one. ¿Quién? ¿Quién in Spanish means who. And whenever we're speaking in Spanish, we have to make sure that the question word for quién matches the subject. So if there's one subject, we're going to say quién, and if there's multiple subjects, we're going to say quiénes. Let me give you an example of this. I could say, ¿Quién es ella? And that is going to be one girl. I'm asking about one person, ella. ¿Quién es ella? I say quién because it's one girl. But if there's a group of people, like you see here, we are going to say quiénes son. We have to say quiénes because this is a group of people. We're not talking about one person. So make sure in Spanish when you use these words, if it needs to have coordination with the subject, that you're thinking about it and you're using that coordination correctly. But how do we ask for whose item something is? For example, I might want to say, whose car is this? In Spanish, you can't say ¿Quién el coche? That doesn't sound right. Instead, you have to put a preposition in front of it. You're going to have to say ¿De quién es el coche? And again, since we're only talking about one person, we're saying whose car is it? This is one person. ¿De quién es el coche? And if we're going to talk about multiple people, so say for example, we have a bunch of books here, and we want to know whose books are these, you're going to have to say quiénes, because again, you have to keep in mind what is the subject here. The subject is the book. So you're going to say, ¿De quiénes son los libros? Because we're talking about multiple things, a stack of books that you see here. So you're going to say, ¿quiénes? ¿De quiénes? So this is very simple. If you're going to say who in Spanish, say quién. And if you want to say whose is it, say de quién or de quiénes. This one is very, very helpful, especially if you're meeting new people. And I know if you're like me, you're learning Spanish so that you can talk to more people. So it'll be very helpful and useful for you. Now, the next one that I'm going to talk about is when. When is a question word that obviously means time. But in Spanish, you don't always use it as a question word. And to be honest, the same thing kind of happens in English. I'm going to give you some examples now so you can understand what I'm saying. For example, you meet somebody new and you want to know more about them, so you're going to ask, when is your birthday? You can say, ¿Cuándo es tu cumpleaños? When is your birthday? But we don't always use when as a question word in Spanish, and we don't do it in English either. We can use it to connect two sentences or two parts of a sentence together. So let's see how that works. I could say, ¿Me llamas cuando llegue María? Will you call me when Maria gets there? And here in English and in Spanish, we have cuando and when in the middle of the sentence because it's connecting two ideas. Will you call me? Maria arrives. It's just connecting the two together. So, will you call me when Maria arrives? And you can do the same thing in Spanish. But whenever you have this in the middle of a sentence in Spanish, you don't have to put the accent. We haven't learned about accents on question words yet, but I'm going to get to it later in this video. So keep watching so you know how to use these words correctly. The next word we're going to learn about is which. So we want to know how to ask for two things, and maybe you want to ask somebody which one of the items do they want. We kind of covered this already, and we saw it as what, right? So whenever we're saying cuál in Spanish, the word is which in English. And it sounds kind of weird if you think about the first example I gave you, cuál es tu nombre? Because in English, we're not going to say which is your name. But in Spanish, the word cuál can also mean what. So keep that in mind. So cuál means what or which. And there's actually two forms of this word. So we have cuál and cuáles. If you've been following along, you're probably guessing cuáles is when we're talking about multiple things, and you are right. Whenever we're talking about a subject that has multiple things, we're going to say cuáles instead of cuál. How could we use this in a sentence? For example, I have two cards here, and I can say, ¿Cuál quieres? We're talking about two of them, right? But because there's only two items and I'm asking about one of them, I can say, ¿Cuál quieres? This one or this one? So that's very simple. The subject is one item, so we're going to say cuál. But what do I do if I have a group of cards and I'm asking somebody cuál quieres? Well, cuál doesn't really make sense because the subject is two. So we're going to have to say cuáles quieres? ¿Cuáles quieres? Do you want these ones or do you want these ones? And this is really what cuáles means. It means these or those, okay? So whenever you're asking about these or those, make sure that you are using cuáles, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. By making that connection in English, I find it's very easy and simple for my students to understand Spanish to a higher level. Now let's move on to a word that kind of sounds like cuál, but it is not the same thing. We're going to say how many, right? How many or how much. And in Spanish, these words sound a lot like cuál, but instead it is cuánto or cuántos, or cuánta or cuántas. As I said, Spanish, you have to make sure that you're coordinating everything. So, for example, cuánto means how many or how much, but it's for an item that is masculine in Spanish. And it's only for one item. So masculine, one item, cuánto. And you can tell by looking at the end of the word because you have the O and then there's no S there. And if we want to talk about something that is only one thing and has a feminine word in Spanish, we're going to say cuanta, cuanta. You can tell that this one is feminine because it has the A here, and also we can tell it's singular because there's no S there. So we're going to say cuanta, cuanta. That is going to be one thing that is feminine in Spanish. So how do we do this when we have multiple things, maybe a group of things? Well, if we have a group of masculine things, we're going to say cuantos, and if we have a group of feminine things, we're going to say cuantas, okay? I'm going to link at the end of this video another video so you can understand how to tell when a word is masculine or feminine in Spanish. This was very difficult for me to learn. Over the last 15 years, I've come up with multiple rules that will help you to understand this a little bit better. So make sure you watch that video if you're having a hard time understanding if a word is masculine or feminine in Spanish. All right, now I'm going to tell you one of the most helpful words that you will ever learn in Spanish, and it is a question word, and that word is como. And a lot of people think como is not a very important Spanish question word, but I have to disagree with them. If you say, como se dice in English, you can put any word that you want here. And when you do that, it's going to make it easy for the person to understand that you want to know how to say a word in Spanish. Como is a very helpful Spanish word. And here's a pro tip. Sometimes when you're talking to people, they will say the word como if they can't understand you as well or if they can't hear you. So if you're talking to somebody and they say como, what you're going to do is you're going to repeat what you said because it means that they probably couldn't hear you. You can also use como for how, and most people know this for ¿cómo estás? How are you today? And this is a very good word to also introduce yourself to people in Spanish. So make sure that you understand the word como very well because it's going to exponentially increase your understanding of Spanish. The next Spanish word that you need to know is donde. Donde is a question word and it means where. So when you're asking where something is, you want to say donde está. Or you can also ask where somebody is going. ¿Dónde va? Or you can just ask where the location of something is. Donde is a very important Spanish word, and if you're talking to somebody in a second language, using this question word is going to help them understand you a lot better, and it will clarify your speech. So make sure you're using donde correctly when you can, and just know that it means where. And again, pay attention to where that accent is. We haven't got to this yet, but we're about to. Donde, just like quién, has a preposition that goes in front of it and it can change what it means. So for quién, we say de quiénes means whose, right? So the preposition de in front of it means whose rather than who. Just like that, with donde, you could say a donde. A, the A, is the preposition here. And when you say a donde, it means where to. Okay, so it doesn't just mean where, it means where to. And that actually brings me on to this preposition a. It is sometimes a pain in the booty in Spanish, but I'm also going to make a video to help you guys understand that. So, if you like the video, go ahead and click subscribe. I'm going to be giving you guys more tips like this that'll help you speak Spanish with a native speaker in record time. The next question words that you need to know are very, very difficult for most native speakers, and that's going to be por qué and para qué. Porque and para qué both mean why, but we use them for different reasons whenever we're speaking Spanish. I'm going to make a full video on por and para as well, so stay tuned because you'll have that video in the coming weeks, and I know that it's going to help you to speak so much better. So when would we use porque and para qué? You actually have to take this from context in Spanish whenever you're speaking to someone. For example, you could say, ¿Por qué le pagaste el dinero? Why did you pay him the money? Here we're asking for a specific reason. Why did you pay him the money? And the next one we could say is, ¿Para qué lo hiciste? Why did you do it? Here we're also asking for another reason. So just make sure that when you're using por que and para que, you know that both of these mean why. And if you're unsure about por and para, go ahead and check out my videos because you'll find the explanation there. Now, we've already kind of gone over how to form questions in Spanish. We know we can use all of these question words here, and we know that sometimes we can just take them away and raise our intonation. And that's going to also create a question in Spanish that doesn't use the question words at all. So let's talk about some more ways to make questions in Spanish because it's a little bit different than in English. In English, we always have to put some form of a pronoun there, but we can remove these in Spanish completely. Is she calling me? In English, if we take out she, it doesn't make any sense. Is calling me. Well, who? Who is calling you? But here is something that took me a long time to learn in Spanish. It took me about 2 years to figure out that in Spanish, you don't have to say these because they're put into the verb. So how would you say, is she calling me in Spanish? You can do it without she completely. And you can just say, ella me llama. The reason we can do this is because whenever we say llama, this is from the verb llamar. Whenever we put the word llama, it means she calling. And this is something I see a lot of people get confused about, especially native speakers. They have a difficult time explaining how we can use just one verb to mean something that's happening. And the reason why is because Spanish is set up to where those verbs, they tell you who the sentence is about, and they can either be something that happens repeatedly or it can be something that's happening right now. Just make sure when you're asking questions that you're paying attention to the verb form and that you're matching it to the subject. And then you can completely drop the pronoun. It sounds a little bit confusing at first, but I promise you, if you practice this repeatedly, you'll learn how to form these verbs without any errors, and it will make your life so much easier. And that's one of the reasons why my Spanish courses are designed to put you face to face with a native speaking Spanish teacher, so that you can learn the automaticity that you need to be able to speak fluently without any issues in as little as 90 days. So if it's something that you're interested in and you really want to learn Spanish, go ahead and click the link in the description and you'll be taken to my website and you can check out my course. Having said that, I know that learning a second language is very difficult, so I want to take the time to congratulate you for watching these videos, putting in the time and effort, because I know in a short amount of time you're going to learn a lot of Spanish if you're practicing every day. Now, let's get to what you've all been waiting for, and that is the importance of accent on Spanish question words. So whenever we're saying a question in Spanish and we're writing the question word, you always have to put an accent. Otherwise, it doesn't appear like a question word. So I'm going to put this list here. Go ahead and look at it. Pay attention to where all the accents are, especially on Y, because you need to put these accents whenever you're writing Spanish. It's not going to affect you so much when you're speaking, but it's definitely going to affect your Spanish writing a lot. So here's the list, and if you want to download this list, check the link in my description and it'll be there available for you. Until then, my name is Sean. These are 8 words that you must know to keep a conversation flowing in Spanish, and I hope that they really helped you. If you have any more question words that you think I missed, go ahead, leave them in the comments, or if you have any questions and want some help, maybe with a video telling you how I learned this from my experience, a native English brain, just like yours, let me know in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to do that and help you guys. Until then, I'll see you soon.